From our studios around the world, this is the Taste of Place podcast. Each month, we share stories from the keepers of culinary culture and heritage to spark ideas for your professional path or your next travel adventure. I'm your host, Eric Wolf. Thanks for listening. Today on the show, we welcome Paula Mohammed, podcaster, cultural explorer, and founder of In My Kitchen. Born to a Pakistani father and a Māori mother and raised in Canada and New Zealand, Paula grew up surrounded by flavors, family, and cross-cultural stories. She's built a career on the idea of creating peace through food, one dish at a time. From childhood memories of curried peas to life-changing adventures in Portugal, Paula shares how food helps us connect, adapt, and let life unfold. Paula, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Eric. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have a fellow podcaster on the show. I hope that maybe you'll teach me a new thing or two. But I'm really excited to learn more about your story, Paula, because in looking at some of the materials about your background, I discovered that you are part Pakistani and part Maori, which is a very unusual combination. And I think it kind of struck me that your multicultural background was really a way to open doors, which may have led into your in your kitchen business, the cooking lessons at home and so on. And so this is just me hypothesizing here. Could you explain a little bit more about your own multicultural background and then how it led to your starting In My Kitchen?
Absolutely. And Eric, just rein me in if if I go on too long here or give too much detail, because I get very excited about this topic. So my background, yes, my name's Paula Mohammed. My father was from Pakistan and he immigrated to Vancouver, where I live now in Vancouver, Canada, when he was 18. My mum is from New Zealand, from the north part of the North Island. And our family story there is my great-great-great-grandfather was a Māori chief. Now, growing up as a child, I was fortunate enough to go back to New Zealand. My parents raised us in Vancouver for the most part, and we'd go back to New Zealand since we were babies and had wonderful experiences with cousins and aunt and uncles and grandparents growing up on the farm. We used to go to school with my cousin at the 2-classroom, 3-walled country school that my mom and my uncle also went to. And so it was just a really beautiful upbringing. It's when you look back on it now, you can appreciate it more than when you're in it, but it definitely influenced me in many ways. And on my father's side, he immigrated to Vancouver with his mother and grandmother. And I was fortunate to meet both of them and remember them both. And sadly, my grandmother, Bibi is whom we called her, she passed away when I was about 5. But Eric, one of my first memories, I think the best way to say it is when I can remember truly savoring a dish is Bibi making curried peas for me in her apartment. And she had one of those butler windows in her kitchen. And I remember, she would wear these beautiful saris and she had the glass bracelets, and I could remember the jingling of the bracelets. Now, I was only 4 years old, so this is probably one of my first memories in general. But I detested peas, like growing up, hated peas. And I saw her bring out peas, and I thought, are you kidding? Like, peas. And she's just like, Paula, just wait. And then it started, the smell of the, what we call masala. So it's the onion, the ginger, the garlic, the spices going in there. And I had already had curry at this point, what was my favorite dish. My mom was a fantastic cook and she learned all of Bibi's recipes. So even at the age of 4, I'd be eating curries, but the smell came, and then she served me the dish of peas and the gravy of the masala. And it was one of the best meals I had. So that kind of introduced me to a love of food and culture very early. My career was mostly in event production and sports marketing. That's kind of where I spent 24 years doing that. And about how many years ago now, in about 2018, I decided it was time to bring this idea I had to fruition, which was around exploring culture through food. Quite frankly, and I don't politicize things ever, but when I look back on it, it was probably around the time that Donald Trump came into his presidency the first time as well. And I think that just everything that was happening in the world and the messaging and things that were going on, it really sparked something in me where I felt I wanted to do something, have some sort of impact. But I didn't know what. And I realized, in my upbringing between my father's background and my mom's background and the amazing memories we had in New Zealand, where we ended up actually living for 5 years in New Zealand from when I was 4 years, 9 to 13 as well. But those experiences and those connections that I had, which always happened over food, showed me that you can really get to know somebody and learn about a culture without it being labeled, but just in a really natural, fun, organic way. And I wanted to bring that to other people as well. In terms of other cultures, we joked that my father was always more Japanese than he was Muslim. And the reason is his business that my parents had was with the Japanese market. So we always had Japanese customers that were visiting in Vancouver. And typically, I think most businessmen would take them out for dinner with their customers, but Dad would often bring them home, and we'd sit at the table, and they would cook in the kitchen with my parents as well. And they would teach my brother and I, who are 7 and 8, these Japanese games, which now I realize were actually drinking games, but they turned it around so it wasn't. But it was just a really fun experience. So I grew up very comfortable around other people of all different backgrounds. And I think that was the piece that I really wanted to have other people experience. So that was then what brought around In My Kitchen. And what In My Kitchen was in the beginning was people would sign up online, and you would go to the home of a host who was a passionate and knowledgeable home cook from different cultures than our own. And you would cook with them and learn their traditional recipes, and some not even traditional, and then sit down together and share the meals. And these hosts that I had recruited are just amazing, amazing people. There's like Naomi from Japan, Layla from Rashtaran, Melissa from Umbria, Italy, Suha was from Qatar, Raymond from the Mekong Delta in Vietnam. It goes on. We launched the company with 7 hosts, and they were all excited and passionate about their cultures and wanted to introduce you to their culture. So that meant it was a really comfortable space for people to ask questions, to make connections, to become friends. And it was pretty amazing to watch people experience that, how In My Kitchen started. And it was born out of my own personal experience of connecting and learning about other cultures around the kitchen table, basically, and the barbecues. New Zealand is notorious, New Zealanders, for their barbies.
I think you were in a really unique position because some of us have grown up with that same kind of situation where your parents had to take a client out to dinner, or the boss was taking someone out to dinner and your parents were invited to come along, and it was usually at a restaurant. But because it was done in your home, that really created unique circumstances, I think, to plant the seed for who you would become.
Yeah, I never actually thought about it that much until I started In My Kitchen. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think taking it even a step further is my parents always had people come around to the house as opposed to going out to restaurants for social occasions. You don't get me wrong, they went out, but they enjoyed entertaining and they enjoyed having meals together with others. And growing up in New Zealand, my parents' close friends were Italian. Katie was actually just this amazing home cook. Amazing. She's actually a New Zealander who married an Italian, and she took on all the culinary expertise of the Italian that she married, Idolo. Anyway, they're a beautiful family, but grew up in their household, which was like a very different than other households in New Zealand, like the ceramics from Italy that were on the walls, the dinners that they would cook, and the al fresco meals in the summertime. So I don't remember restaurant meals, and I don't remember restaurant dinners. I remember it was exciting to go out to a restaurant, but where I really felt my best and when I really felt this warmth was these meals in the home of others or in our home with family and friends around. Oh,
Whenever we work with restaurants or chefs or cooks, we encourage them to try to serve a memory and not just a meal. And it sounds like a lot of what you're telling is the memories from your childhood. Yeah, there was some great food, but it was really the memories of the experiences and having the people over in your home, and that kind of thing is really what stands out and what you just said.
Absolutely. And I think this is, I mentioned it when we were chatting before we hit record, but when I launched in my kitchen, I was very passionate about this having to take place in their home because I wanted it to be that the hospitality piece to come through. Now, fast forward through COVID and how many years later, 5 or 6 years later, what I learned is I was wrong, not wrong, but I was incorrect. What I've experienced is we've been able to create those memories and those connections online, in rented space, in restaurants, in corporate settings. And to your point, it is about creating a memory, or I always use the word creating experiences. And it's interesting. I was going back and looking at some things, and it went back to my passion for creating events and why I went down that road initially. And I found in a previous interview what I had said, and it was this desire to create experiences for people that turn into memories that cause a shift. And I just, for the first time, drew that parallel to, that's exactly what I'm doing now, but through food versus before it was through sports and different events.
Peace through food, right?
Yeah, exactly. One dish at a time, build acceptance.
So I would like you to expound on this, if you would. I was looking at what you wrote before the show, and your three principles: let it marinate, let it bend, and let it unfold. What does that mean?
What is that?
I love it.
I wish I could say it was a recipe to a great dish, and it is in some sense. So what that is I was fortunate to again live at a young age in New Zealand, travel to New Zealand. I did the backpacking thing for 6 months during my university years, which many of us were able to do, and it was special now looking back because it was before the internet, right? So that's a whole other experience. You really are. It's a different experience than now. I also had a very interesting experience in Portugal where I went there. I was 28 and I was going to go and work at the expo to further my event career. And I didn't end up working at the expo. I ended up staying in Portugal for 4 months. I went there with sort of preconceived ideas of the experiences I wanted to have. And it ended up nothing like that. But I sometimes joke is that I went to Portugal to find myself, and I came back realizing I had created myself. It was a real learning experience, which I can dive into later. So all that to say, when I was doing these online experiences for In My Kitchen, I would be the facilitator. So our host would be there. We would have, one time we had 400 people on a webinar watching us. But I would pull these stories out of our host so that the idea is people got to know the stories behind the person. And then what came out of that were my own stories as well. And then I started realizing that when I look back and also how I travel now is I very intentionally traveled wanting to explore culture through food. It's not like I came up with, I want to show people how to explore culture through food. I was doing it just because that's where my interest was. And from that story of eating BB's curried peas, you can see why I was so excited about it and finding more of that in my travels. So I decided to share this with people. And at first I'm like, well, I don't know. I just do it. And then people started pointing out to me and people would ask me, hey, you were you told the story about making chicken stock in Portugal with hardly even a kitchen. Like, why were you making chicken stock? And I was like, oh, because I read this book and it had the recipe, and I like to take the recipe to the markets and use the recipe to get to know people and learn about ingredients. And you start realizing that these are things that were unique to me. So I created this framework, and it's kind of, I call it my 4 steps to a one-of-a-kind trip through food. And it starts with my 3 principles where let it marinate, let it bend, and let it unfold. And let it marinate is about, I know I don't like it necessarily, is arriving somewhere and it taking me like a week to get into travel mode. I want to maximize my time. So I want to arrive there and not get culture shock necessarily, but hit the ground running. So I do that through ideally reading food focused books, but not cookbooks. So I know most people might be a bit surprised by that, but I like to get cookbooks during my travels and then when I get home. But beforehand, I'd love reading a book that has recipes sprinkled throughout it. would be my dream kind of book from the region that I'm going to. Or I like to read about the region that I'm going to, like many people I know do. I prefer, if I can, for example, was it James Clavell's novel, Hawaii? There's nothing like reading that, even opening it up on your first morning in Hawaii with your Kona coffee and reading about the growth of the islands and then going through all the centuries and things like that. So that marinate part is for me about going down rabbit holes, starting to read stories, and then I collect some of those recipes. Now, with the internet and social media, this has also gone into shows. Feed Phil. I know I love Feed Phil for learning about the different places and the food and culture. And then from my event days, I quickly learned that if you have a plan, nothing will go to plan on event days. But if you're organized and if you have sort of your tools in place, it gives you the confidence to go into that event day. And, when things start hitting the fan and everything goes sideways, you can let it bend. You can go with the flexibility of it because you've got your tools and you can meander through it and have the confidence to be open to new and different things. And that's for me in my travels. I like to use a travel planner tool that I have, and I share it with people if they want to use it, but you'll only like it if you like Excel spreadsheets. But it's basically, I took my event planning tool that I had created and turned it into a travel planning tool for myself. And that just gives me my plan ahead of time. But what I do is when I hit the ground, and this is sort of that time now when I'm traveling, the let it bend part is be flexible, let things kind of go with the flow. And I can do that because I'm confident in the background work that I've done or the planning, and not that I like to over plan. And I do like to show up at some places and have no plan. But I find if I have my tools sort of bookending the trip is I can be more flexible. I'm more comfortable to be flexible. And that then leads into the unfold part, which is basically be, empowered and to get myself to a place where I feel confident to really be open to different experiences. Part of that is what I said earlier is I like to take a recipe. I love going to the food markets, like I'm sure you do too, Eric. I mean, it's such an amazing way to get to know the people of a place that you're visiting. So going to the food markets, and when language is a barrier, pointing to different ingredients, and then people love that. They open up. They like you're showing an interest in learning from somebody else, and that's part of that. Let things unfold in that way. And I just find for me, people may not believe this because I know I'm talking a lot, but I'm actually quite shy. Growing up, I was painfully shy. And this was a way for me to sort of get myself out there in my travels. Because I had to actually, for me, I had to consciously put myself out of my comfort zone. It wasn't easy for me to put myself out there. And this little hack of mine with recipes and going to markets is I felt comfortable. I could get out there and talk to people. And then going back to the chicken stock in Portugal, I would make dishes in my little kitchen if I had one. So I tend to travel where I can have VRBOs. Having said that, my trip to Japan in March, we didn't have VRBOs, and it was as rich of an experience anyway. And then within those 3 principles, I have my 4 steps, which is just gets down to more of the nitty gritty. But that's kind of the framework that I put around how I leverage my experiences. And then I love to come home with ceramics. That's my weakness, is I buy ceramics and then have a dinner party or a few friends over, keeping it casual, but sharing some of the dishes and recipes that I enjoyed when in my travels with friends and family here.
So you bring ceramics home and I bring food home that I find in grocery stores. I load up a suitcase full of sauces and condiments and biscuits and coffees and teas and you name it. And it becomes a bit of a show and tell when I get home. So it's quite fun.
I love that.
Now, let's go back to something you said before. You said that you went to Portugal to find yourself, but that's where you created yourself. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think I created resilience, curiosity, and probably a little bit of courage in myself. What happened was I was 28. I had finished university. I was launching my event career, sports marketing, had big dreams. I think that's the other thing. I think dreams are fantastic, and I hope people dream big and go after them. And so I was going to Portugal to go work at the expo, and things had been set up to a certain degree. I wasn't like I had a guaranteed job, but I had a very good lead and almost a promise of a job when I got there. Very fortunate to have very dear family friend who's Portuguese. I actually have a podcast episode with Maria. It's great. And she lives part-time or half the year at least in Portugal now. And she was able to find me an apartment in a lovely town called Cascais, which is about 30 minutes
Yeah.
outside of Lisbon. I
Yeah.
was just back there this past March. Sorry, two Marches ago, I was in Japan, and this past March, I was in Portugal, went to Cascais, and I can't believe how touristy it is now. We were there before the tourist season, but it's still very busy. Anyway, I had this really neat little apartment there. So I went to Portugal, Eric, and I had this vision that I was going to be scuba diving in the Azores Islands, and I was going to be mountain biking in the hills of Cascais, and actually took my mountain bike with me. For people who are avid mountain bikers, it's some of the best apparently around the Sintra area. And I wasn't a strong mountain biker, Eric. I loved being on my mountain bike, but I certainly was not, somebody who was very talented. But I enjoyed it. But I had this vision, and this was going to be my trip. And because I wanted to create stories that I could tell my grandchildren, and I was on this mission. So I arrived there, and the first thing is my mountain bike was taken apart to get packaged. And then I thought I could put it back together. Well, I couldn't. So my first adventure was trying to find a place to get my mountain bike put back together. And that led me on this journey of going through streets and laneways and on different buses and getting to a really remote little area. Nobody spoke English. And there I am with this bike and a wheel in one hand and the frame in the other. And I did find a bike shop, and they actually faxed back and forth with my bike shop in Vancouver. But all that to say, I never saw my bike again for 4 months. It took that long to get parts sent back and forth. So I never had my mountain biking experience. And for somebody who's actually quite shy, it took a bit of courage for me to sort of go out there and navigate that experience. And then I never got to work at the expo. The expo in Lisbon almost went bankrupt, so nobody was hiring. So I called home because I was like, what am I going to do? And my parents raised me in a way that was, if you don't have the funds in your bank account to spend, then you don't buy it. Buy what you don't spend it. Basically don't get a loan. They didn't believe in loans. And piece of the story is I also had a boyfriend at this time back home in Vancouver, and he and I were moving to Toronto. Now, I'm a real, if you know, if you're from Vancouver, British Columbia, you're a West Coast person. Moving to Toronto is a big change. And to be honest, I didn't really want to go to Toronto. So I don't think my parents did either, because when I called home and said, I'm not able to get a job, I think I'm just going to have to come back and I'll just go to Toronto earlier. I never forget my dad. He passed away in 2010, but he's like, Paula, no. Look, get a line of credit and just stay there for the 4 months. You'll have an experience. Well, he was just trying to keep me from going to Toronto, but I did that. And that then led me to being able to stay in Portugal in my little apartment. I went to the expo grounds to still try and get a job just on site if I couldn't get it through the supplier that I was working with. And I went to the Canadian Pavilion. Well, first of all, I broke through security, which again, I was shy and I followed the rules, but I deked out security because they wouldn't let me on. And I was able to get onto the grounds because it was 2 days before the expo officially opened. And I went to the Canadian Pavilion thinking, well, they'll take me under their wing. Surely they'll give me a job. Well, they called security on me. And so I quickly left. I know, I couldn't believe it, Eric. And then I know, I quickly deked out of there.
Betrayed
and I went
by your own countrymen.
I'll never forget that. It was Heritage Canada. And so I went to the US Pavilion, and I have to say they were fantastic. And they immediately said, okay, can you volunteer for us right now? I said, absolutely. So I went and picked up some PR pamphlets or something that they needed, and then spent a couple hours helping them out. And then they said, that really that's it. We don't have anything else for you. So I went and sat on these steps, and I was very, very felt deflated and just like, what am I going to do? And then these 4 clowns, buskers, came by, and it was these clowns, didn't speak any English, and they were hilarious. They sat down beside me and they turned that frown upside down, and we didn't speak the same language, but we had a lot of fun. So I'll never forget those 4 characters. So then I decided, okay, I'm going to stay here and just explore. So I got a ticket to fly to the Azores Islands and wanted to go on this, have a diving experience in the Azores Islands. And I go to the Azores Islands. Now I hear of people traveling to these islands, which are amazing if you ever get a chance. They're Portuguese islands that are between basically Portugal and New York. So if you leave New York, it's the first land that you hit. Very remote in 1998. People weren't traveling there. Very, very traditional, set back probably 80 years from mainland Portugal. Very interesting experience. But for, again, a shy girl on her own, it was a bit challenging. But I rented a mountain bike and went mountain biking up through the hills. I was in San Miguel, I think is where I was. And I got myself caught up in a parade, a festival, a religious festival. And there I am in my biking shorts and people are just staring at me. And I realized this is not a usual sight for them. I found a hotel that wasn't open for business yet because I guess I was there off season, but there was a dive instructor there. And so he said, yeah, come back tomorrow. I'll take you for a dive. I said, perfect. So day 3 of me being on San Miguel, I rented a car, drove up there, and we went diving. And this is a bit of a long story, so I'm going to cut it short. But unbeknownst to me, there had been an earthquake just before I had arrived in San Miguel. And when we went diving, the equipment was a little bit sketchy. And if you're a diver, then you just don't dive. But I was so bent on having these experiences, I put my own safety at risk and went diving anyway. And then the water was really murky. And I realized this was strange. And then all of a sudden we got these rogue waves hitting us and we were up, there was the ocean and then 3 sides of high cliffs around us. And we were just getting smashed up against the rocks. And it was quite scary. All that to say, we eventually got out of it, but it wasn't the experience that I wanted. And then the rest of my time in Portugal was kind of more of these type of experiences. So what it did is it definitely, I had a reckoning moment with myself in terms of, I got to make the most of this. And eventually it helped me, definitely build resilience and get over, shyness. And it made me, I think, a much stronger person. And it was actually through food and through cooking. And that was the first time I actually went to a market with a recipe and did this little exercise, but it pushed me in another direction because these other things that I was trying to do weren't working for me. And so when I say joke about it created me, it really matured me, I think, in a way where I realized you don't go traveling because you want to check something off a list and put it in your little bag and show and say, hey, I've done this. For me, it's all about seeing what I'm going to discover there, who I'm going to meet, the connections I'm going to make, and being open to whatever is going to happen and not having expectations. I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that we make, going to restaurants or in our travels or in life in general is, having preconceived expectations, as opposed, because we miss so many opportunities for little connections that are all around us. But if you've got this tunnel vision like I had, you miss so much. And as soon as I let go of that, the rest of my time in Portugal had its ups and downs, but it ended up being a life-changing moment. And Portugal, I always say, is probably one of my the favorite place for me to visit. Go with the flow. Let it unfold. Go with the flow. Breathe. You know what I say? I was just going to say, out of all that, it gives you a lot to reflect back on. And I wish I had more confidence myself at that age to be open to having my own experiences as opposed to wanting to check some off the list. But I now look and I say, whether you're exploring a new restaurant, meeting new people, traveling, is slow down, savor, and smile. That's my 3 things.
I like that. That's easy to remember. Now, I have to ask you, when you were at the expo and you met the clowns, was there any food involved in that?
It's interesting. I wish I could say there was, but there wasn't. But I have to say, I would love to have had a meal with those 3 clowns around the table. I do have a good story though at that time in Portugal over food is people who know me well have had my mussels catapilana. So are you familiar with the catapilana dish from Portugal?
No.
It's traditionally done with clams, and you would have it on the coast, a beachside bar, and they'd have a beer and snack on clams. And a catapilana used to be a copper dome. I'm not sure, it's probably made out of steel now, but dome shaped vessel. And you put your clams in there and just a little bit of liquid. And they used to be cooked on an open fire. And then you open it up and you just get this waft of beautiful smells. And I met these women on the beach in Cascais. And again, being the shy girl from Vancouver, took, I made myself go up and introduce myself to them because they were having so much fun and they were lovely. And they said, hey, you should come out with us tonight and come watch us dance. And I said, watch you dance? Oh, you're dancers anyway, they were exotic dancers. I didn't realize that at the time. Yeah. But they were so welcoming, but we ended up sharing a catapilana together on the beachside bar. I didn't go watch them dance. That wasn't a path that I was ready to go down just yet, but we had a lot of fun. So the catapilana, I now use mussels because I prefer mussels, but that's probably one of my signature dishes that I love to share. And then when I was on the Azores Islands, after my diving accident, I went on a hike and I ended up meeting this two brothers and a woman. They were sailing, circumnavigating. It was an epic trip that they were doing, but they were in the Azores Islands on their sailboat. And we ended up traveling together for about 4 days because I had the car and so they were happy to have a car as well to roam around on. But we shared many dishes together and great memories just sitting back on these plastic chairs on the beach with the prawns done in garlic and white wine and parsley and moments like that were fantastic. Those are the ones I remember and go back on and reflect on, and it's great because I get those positive vibes all over again. It's like recycling a positive experience and getting the benefits over and over. I think food is wonderful for that.
You have these great memories and great experiences in your life. How do you define success?
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I find that success for me has been different at different stages of my life. And I think how I define success now, and I say this also recognizing that it's a privilege to be able to define it this way, as to be doing something that I love, where it is able to be almost a blurred line between work and what I enjoy. So my family has been through many dishes where I'm recipe testing or experimenting, or I've learned so much from all of our culinary experiences with our hosts. Like, how lucky am I that that's my business? And I've learned so much about the world through Raymond, Melissa, Suha, Layla, from Rashtaran to the Mekong Delta. So doing what I love, but also for me, what's become really important is having an impact. And I felt that I was quite a failure in that for a long time because I wanted to have a positive impact on the world in some way, like have a legacy left behind. And I see now that through In My Kitchen, we're doing that, and it's given me this vehicle to share. I'm 55 now, so a little bit of wisdom, but to share what I've learned and to offer opportunities for people who want to learn about other cultures to do that through our community, through the podcast, through the travel journal that we're going to have coming out. And for me, it's also about being able to have flexibility and being able to go with the flow. So that's success for me. It also has to pay for itself. Let's be realistic. It can't be a drain on finances, but it's not at this stage of my life. It's not about reaching big financial goals. It's about feeling connected. I found through COVID, I didn't realize it, but I was quite isolated. We were so busy with In My Kitchen doing the online experiences. Layla and I were just talking about it and realizing we were probably doing 5 days a week, multiple online experiences in that time. But I came out of that and I kept working from home, and then we weren't doing those online experiences. And then it wasn't until just these last couple of months that I actually have now rented office space with somebody else as well, because I need connection. And so success for me is more about getting out there and connecting with people, connecting with the world, versus staying in my office and hammering out hour after hour after hour on my own, trying to sell as many units of or culinary spots as possible. I want to create things that I can leave that will stick around after me, or if somebody has a shift from one of our experiences, culinary experiences, or gains perspective, then that's success for me
A
now.
legacy.
Yeah, there you go. That's an easier way to put it. A
Yeah.
legacy.
Yeah.
Whereas 24-year-old Paula was like, and 28-year-old Paula, it was all about go work at the expo. I was going to run the Olympics. I was either going to be in the Olympics or I was going to run the Olympics. Like, it was very different. And then, it was an amazing journey, and it was lots of fun. And it was, I wouldn't change it for the world. But I think part of uh, life is you also realize that you change and your circumstances change, and what we need change as we get older, and or as we experience life longer.
So what's your next destination?
Yeah, well, I'm very excited to be going to Barcelona and Mallorca in October. And this is going to be with my mom. So what I didn't get a chance to mention is my parents, they inspired me with their love for sharing and cooking food. They also inspired me their love of travel. My mom has, she really should be the one here doing the interview. Her stories are unbelievable, and she will just sit there quietly without feeling a need to share them. But her stories of her travels could be a movie. And her and I are going together on this trip. So I'm very excited about that. And then my younger son, who's graduating from high school, he and I are going to the Galapagos Islands in March. And I was there in 2001. I think I was there a long time ago. So I'm very excited. He's very interested in marine biology and animals, and astronomy, actually, a little bit of everything.
Okay.
But we're really excited about that upcoming trip too.
Have you spent any time in Ecuador before?
Yes, I did. Again, when I went to the Galapagos, interesting time. I was on my own and I was in Quito, and I'm trying to remember what was happening politically. But all I remember is there was the army on every corner with machine guns, and there was a curfew. I think, I don't know, 9 p.m. You had to be everyone off the streets. But prior to being on my own, I was there for about 3 days waiting to go to the Galapagos. Prior to that, I was traveling with a friend in Peru and Ecuador, and her and I went down to Baños in Ecuador. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's apparently it was a place that a lot of locals would go to for their holidays. Very tropical. Yeah, very, very interesting. Lots of fun. Great food. I think that's definitely, I'm looking for, maybe you can help me out. I'd love to do an interview with somebody from Ecuador and talk about the food scene there, and what's happening.
Ecuador is one of my favorite destinations for food, and we have a culinary capital, which is a certification for destinations in Cuenca, Ecuador, is one of our culinary capitals. And I got to tell you, some of the best meals I've had have been in both Quito and Cuenca. Really fantastic food, and such nice people too, you know?
Yes. Okay, tell me, like, describe a dish to me, because when I was there, the food was great, and we had the guinea pig and pisco sours. I love the drink, the pisco sour. But I've heard this before from people, how amazing the food is, and I want to visualize it, get a sense of what you experienced.
Well, they are one of the world's biggest shrimp exporters. So if you like shrimp, it is a fantastic destination for shrimp. You will have nothing but the freshest, tastiest, biggest shrimp of your life there. There's a dish called motepillo, which is made with hominy. You know hominy? Like the big corn kernels?
Okay. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
and scrambled eggs and a few other things. And that's kind of a classic dish from Cuenca in the mountains. And of course, Ecuador is known for its coffee and also its chocolate. And there is a chocolate maker there called Pakistani, and they focus on different varietals of chocolate. You can, and actually their showroom and headquarters is in Cuenca as well. But they focus on they're the number one rated fairest trade chocolate company in the world, which I thought was their story is absolutely fascinating. And we're going to have the woman from Pakari on a podcast later this fall. But they focus on different varietals from throughout Ecuador. And they said, and this one is from the Esmeralda province. And what do you taste? And I said, banana. And they said, yes, there's no banana in it, but the chocolate has kind of a banana aroma to it.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and just little things like that, like little secrets pop up all the time. I would just put your hands in your faith in the hands of the locals and go with the flow, because
Yeah.
they will make sure that you have the best possible food and you will not go away with any bad food memories, guaranteed.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm hearing people talk more and more about Ecuador. It seems to be definitely on the radar these days. This is what I mean about success for me is going to Galapagos with my son, but that will also be turned into, I'm going to use it for in my kitchen, of course, as well in the podcast show. And I feel very lucky to be able to bring it all together. Like I'm sure you are doing the same, Eric. I can only imagine that you're passionate about food and culture and in a role that allows you to live it every day.
It is a fun position to be in. Sometimes it's exhausting, but I enjoy what I do. Well, Paula, we need to wrap up, but it was a real pleasure. I loved listening to your stories. I feel like a child, listening to mom's stories or something, and just growing up and your trips to New Zealand and not liking peas, but then you had the pea masala and how you went through the growing pains in Portugal and had to kind of learn how to become an adult and how you grew into your own adulthood. And it was just a fascinating time to listen to your stories. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me, and it was so fun to be here and to have you want to listen to my stories.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of the Taste of Place podcast. This episode is brought to you by the World Food Travel Association and its Taste of Place movement. We'd like to hear from you. We invite you to share your ideas, questions, and thoughts about the podcast by contacting us through our website. Or you can connect with us and comment about the episode on major social media platforms. Special thanks to our guest Paula Mohammed, and our sincerest thanks to you for joining us. I'm Eric Wolf, wishing you a safe, happy, and productive month ahead.